I never thought I'd be in this situation, asking my friend's mom for help. It's one of those things you imagine would never happen to you, but there I was, standing in her kitchen, trying to find the words. My friend wasn't around, and the task ahead of me seemed impossible to tackle alone. I had no choice. It was either swallow my pride and ask for her assistance, or fail miserably at something that felt way beyond my abilities. She smiled when I finally worked up the nerve to ask. It wasn't a condescending smile, more like a mix of surprise and warmth, as if she'd been waiting for a moment like this. Her eyes crinkled at the corners, and she nodded slightly. "Sure," she said, her voice calm and assuring. "I can help with that." There wasn't a hint of hesitation, which somehow made me feel more at ease. But it still felt odd. I mean, this was my friend's mom, not someone I'd ever thought of as more than just that. As we started to get things together, I found myself awkwardly watching her, trying to figure out how this was going to work. I had never really noticed before how capable she looked. Everything she did seemed measured, purposeful, like she knew exactly what was needed. I fumbled through explaining what needed to be done, trying to make it sound as easy as possible, though in truth, I didn't fully know what I was doing. She didn't seem fazed by my lack of clarity, just quietly listening and nodding. I didn't expect her to jump in so quickly. Honestly, I half expected her to tell me she couldn't help after all, that she wasn't equipped for this. But instead, she just rolled up her sleeves and said, "All right, let's see what we've got here." That's when it hit me. This was no ordinary favor. She wasn't just helping me out. She was taking the lead, guiding us through something that, moments before, had felt completely out of my reach. As she started to lay out the steps we'd need to take, I realized how out of my depth I really was. But she never made me feel that way. Instead, she walked me through everything, as if this was just another day for her. Her confidence was contagious, and before I knew it, I was right there with her, following her lead, feeling a strange sense of relief that I wasn't in this alone. It wasn't what I expected at all. I thought I'd be doing most of the work while she watched, or maybe gave a few suggestions. But no, this was her show now, and I was just trying to keep up. Every time I hesitated, unsure of what to do next, she'd be there with a quiet word or a simple gesture, moving things forward effortlessly. It felt like she knew exactly what needed to be done from the very beginning, even when I wasn't sure what I'd asked her to help with in the first place. By the time we really got into it, I wasn't just impressed, I was grateful. This wasn't just a favor anymore, it was a lesson. And as strange as it felt to admit it, I was learning more from her in these few moments than I ever thought possible. There was something humbling about realizing just how much I had underestimated her, and how much I still had to learn. It was clear that this wasn't going to be the simple task I had imagined. But with her there beside me, I felt like maybe, just maybe, we could pull it off. The initial awkwardness between us didn't last long. As soon as we started working, it became clear that she knew what she was doing. I still felt a bit out of place, unsure if I was supposed to lead or just follow along. But she didn't seem to care about that. She was focused, moving through each step like she'd done it 100 times before, while I was still trying to figure out what came next. Her calm confidence made it easier for me to stop overthinking and just focus on the task. At first, I kept expecting her to ask for clarification or pause to question what we were doing, but she didn't. Instead, she'd glance at me every now and then, giving a quick nod or offering a suggestion, guiding me in a way that felt natural. It didn't take long before I stopped feeling the weight of the situation. I wasn't working with my friend's mom anymore. I was working with someone who clearly knew her way around a challenge. I hadn't realized how much there was to this. What I had thought would be a simple task had layers to it that I hadn't anticipated. She saw it right away, though. Without missing a beat, she began pointing out details I'd overlooked, small things that made all the difference. Every time she showed me something, it was like a light bulb went off in my head. Why hadn't I seen that before? It seemed obvious once she pointed it out, but until then, I was completely in the dark. Watching her work was almost mesmerizing. She wasn't just going through the motions, there was a rhythm to the way she did things, like she was always a step ahead. She never rushed, but there was a sense of urgency in how she handled everything, like she knew time was important, but didn't want to sacrifice precision. It was fascinating and a little intimidating, to be honest. I'd expected her to help out here and there, maybe offer some advice, but this was more than that. She was the driving force behind everything we were doing. I started to relax as we moved forward, realizing I didn't have to have all the answers. She had plenty of them, and I was learning more with each passing moment. Every now and then, she'd stop to explain something in more detail, and I'd nod along, taking it all in. It wasn't just that she knew what she was doing, it was how she handled things with such a quiet authority. There was no doubt, no hesitation, just a clear sense of purpose. The more we worked, the more I began to see her in a different light. I'd always thought of her as just my friend's mom, someone who made great dinners and reminded us to pick up after ourselves. But here, she was so much more than that. She had a wealth of experience and knowledge that I had completely overlooked. It was humbling, realizing how much I had underestimated her, but it was also inspiring. I found myself following her lead without even thinking about it. Whenever I hit a snag or felt unsure, she was already a step ahead, guiding us through the next part. I wasn't just learning about the task at hand. I was learning how to approach problems in a way that I hadn't considered before. It wasn't about doing things perfectly from the start. It was about adapting, adjusting, and figuring things out as you went. It became clear that I was benefiting far more from this experience than I had expected. She wasn't just helping me with the task, she was teaching me how to approach challenges with a sense of calm and confidence. By the time we were halfway through, I wasn't worried about messing up anymore. I trusted that, with her there, we could handle whatever came next. Just when things seemed to be going smoothly, we hit an unexpected snag. Something wasn't fitting right, and it wasn't a small issue either. We'd overlooked a crucial piece of the puzzle, and now we were stuck. I could feel that familiar wave of doubt creeping in, the kind that tells you maybe you've bitten off more than you can chew. I stood there staring at the problem, my mind racing through possible solutions, but none of them seemed like they'd work. This was the moment where I thought, this is it. We're not getting through this. But she didn't flinch. She looked at the problem, then at me, and I could see her brain working through it. There was no panic, no sign of frustration, just calm. "It's okay," she said simply, almost as if she expected this to happen. I, on the other hand, was already thinking of how I'd explain to my friend that I couldn't finish what I'd set out to do. But she wasn't about to let that happen. Without missing a beat, she started walking me through a different approach, one that I hadn't considered at all. It was a strange feeling, watching her take control so effortlessly when I was on the verge of giving up. She had a way of looking at the situation that was completely different from mine. Where I saw a wall, she saw a challenge, something that could be worked through with the right mindset. She suggested a workaround, a small adjustment that seemed almost too simple to fix such a big issue, but there was confidence in her voice that made me want to trust her instinct. Reluctantly, I agreed to give it a shot. It felt like a long shot, but I had no better ideas, and she seemed so sure of what needed to be done. As we started adjusting things, I noticed how she stayed calm even as the problem persisted. Every time something didn't go according to plan, she would stop, assess, and try again. There was no frustration, no throwing up her hands in defeat, just patience and quiet determination. It was like watching someone who had been through this 100 times before, someone who knew that the only way to solve a problem was to keep working at it until it gave way. Her persistence was infectious. I stopped second-guessing myself and just followed her lead, realizing that this wasn't about doing everything perfectly, it was about being willing to try different approaches until something clicked. Slowly but surely, we made progress. The solution wasn't immediate or easy, but it was coming together, piece by piece, thanks to her calm guidance. There was a moment in the thick of it where I realized I had learned something more important than just fixing the problem in front of us. I had learned how to stay grounded when things didn't go as planned. I had learned that sometimes the answer isn't obvious, and that's okay. You just have to keep pushing forward, adjusting, and trusting that you'll figure it out. And that's exactly what we did. Bit by bit, the problem unraveled, and I started to feel the weight lift off my shoulders. We hadn't just gotten past the obstacle. We'd done it together, and that made the victory feel even more satisfying. It wasn't the solution I had in mind when we started, but it was the right one. All because she never gave up, even when I was ready to call it quits. In the end, the challenge wasn't just about solving the issue. It was about learning how to stay in the game, how to work through frustration, and how to keep going even when things seemed impossible. And she had shown me that in a way I wouldn't forget. We finally got it done. The sense of relief washed over me as the last piece fell into place, and I couldn't help but let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. It wasn't perfect, but it was finished, and it felt like we had climbed a mountain to get here. I glanced over at her, expecting her to maybe give a satisfied nod or say something about the hard work paying off, but she didn't. She just wiped her hands clean, calm, and composed as ever, like this was just another task she'd crossed off her list. No big deal. But for me, it was more than that. It wasn't just about completing the task, it was about everything that had happened along the way. I found myself thinking back to when I had first asked her for help, how awkward I'd felt, and how unsure I was that we'd even be able to pull it off. Now, standing here at the end of it all, those feelings seemed so distant. What stuck with me wasn't the task itself, but how we'd managed to figure it out together. There was something about the way she handled everything, the way she stayed calm under pressure, that made me rethink a lot of things. I had come into this thinking of her as just my friend's mom, someone who helped with small stuff, someone always on the sidelines.
But she was so much more than that.
She had a quiet strength that I hadn't seen before, an ability to push through challenges without letting them overwhelm her. It was something I admired, even though I hadn't realized it until now. As we stood there, I felt the urge to say something, to thank her not just for her help, but for teaching me more than I expected to learn. But the words didn't come out. Instead, we shared a brief moment of silence, the kind that didn't need filling. There was an understanding between us that went beyond words, a sense that we'd both gained something from this experience. Looking back, I realized how much I'd grown from this. It wasn't just about getting the job done. It was about learning how to approach things differently, how to stay calm when things don't go as planned, and how to rely on someone else when you can't do it all alone. She had shown me that without ever making a big deal about it. It was just who she was. The whole experience left me with a new perspective. I had walked into this thinking I needed help with a task, but I walked away with something much more valuable, a new appreciation for the people around me, the ones I'd overlooked or underestimated. I'd learned that help doesn't always come from the places you expect, and sometimes the most capable people are the ones quietly working in the background, ready to step up when it matters most. As I left, I knew I wouldn't look at her the same way again. She wasn't just my friend's mom anymore. She was someone who had taught me something important about resilience, about pushing through even when things got tough. And that's not something I would forget anytime soon.